Hello, welcome back to the Tears of Fire podcast, a podcast where I go over the last Dragon Chronicles by Chris DeLacy. I'm Diego. I created this podcast because I wanted to interact with this series again after over 15 years of not interacting with it, period. I couldn't find any podcast or audiobooks. There was a few videos on YouTube that were only a couple of minutes long and over 7 years old, probably even older now. So I figured, why not make it myself? Today we're going to be going over chapters 16 through 19 of Darkfire. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you had a safe flight in and hit no turbulence. You might have noticed something different, that this is now a video podcast. If you guys have any suggestions or comments, please let me know at gadzooksthelastdm@gmail.com. I'm still learning, so please be nice. But with that being said, let's get into the episode. We're going to be starting off this week with chapter 16, Kitchen Talk. This comes right after the last chapter, obviously, where we saw Zanna and Alexa heading to Zanna's shop, and they got attacked by the Darkling Raven flock. They were saved by Tam, and everybody went back to the Pennykettle house. This is where we're going to be opening up this week, with David talking to the household, except for Arthur, who's still at the university teaching. Everybody's pretty concerned and there's high emotions, as after an attack, there would be. David lets everybody know that they're not really in too much danger, which is obviously, how could David say that? That's a lie. Zanna was almost killed and had her finger chopped off. But he says that what the Darklings were actually after was a dragon, and they could sense that Gretel was in Zanna's purse with her and trying to get her tear, which they almost succeeded in. There's some pretty high emotions, and Zanna decides to leave. She slams the door and says that she needs to start packing to get her and Alexa over to their new house, which they were bequeathed upon by Henry Bacon with his unfortunate passing. Liz is asking David if they're in any immediate or mortal danger, and David just takes a look around, saying that if anything happens, that Bonington and Zanna should be able to handle it. Knowing that Bonington is such a formidable feline, uh, makes me feel a little bit better. We know that he can grow in size now, as well as just change forms. His favorites are going between a Black Panther and a saber-toothed tiger, which we all know would be pretty freaking cool. My favorite saber-tooth is Diego from Ice Age. Wonder if you can make that connection there. But so after all of this is going on, David says that he needs to leave as well. And after Liz is going to go pick up Arthur, he takes a second to speak with Lucy. He asks Lucy if she's given any more thought to going to see the Scruffenberry Hill where the dragon rests with Tam. Lucy takes a second and thinks in her head. There's so many emotions going through her: excitement, exhilaration, worry, anxiety. She loves Tam, but she doesn't want to cause any more trouble. She lets David know that Zanna still pretty much hates him, informs him of what I'm sure David already knew, that Tam had come in trying to essentially use Zanna to get information about David, because he didn't believe that David really existed, but he was wanting to write an article on him for his magazine/newspaper. The book did say magazine, but if I was interpreting correctly from the entire last book, he was a news reporter. So I know that it's possible for articles to be cross-published per se, but I don't remember any mentions of magazines, so I'm not sure what the tier list is on that. If magazines are, a tier above a daily newspaper or however that goes. If it is, awesome for Tam. I'm glad that he's getting, seems like it would be a promotion, but I'm still iffy on Tam myself. We know that His actions in the last book were not my favorite, even though he did have a semi redemption arc where he decided to go after Lucy and save her, trying to protect Zanna as well. And then in this last chapter, he came to the rescue, seemingly out of nowhere. I don't know if Tam now has teleportation powers like David does. It just came out of the blue, but we're kind of left with that there. Towards the end of this conversation, though, Lucy does tell David that she got an email from Sophie saying that she's wondering about Grace. She's been noticing things like Grace moving, her ears twitching a little bit here and there. David gets extremely worried and says that he needs to leave. He's going to grab Groin, who is the dragon talisman that was once Bergstrom's, that can that can change shapes from the narwhal tusk over to dragon form and go invisible as well. But they also use him to be teleported. And with that, David just takes off. That brings us to the end of that chapter. It was pretty short, but we got the emotions riding high and not too much information. This is again one of the only mentions that we've had Sophie since like book two at the end of it when they broke up. We know that Sophie was a huge main character in the first one, The Fire Within, when they were having their adventures with Conker and Snigger the squirrels. She wasn't too much in the second book, though. That's when Zanna came in and Sophie was off doing her own kind of work with the wildlife preserve, and David was at home taking his classes, and then eventually ended up breaking up with her after, in my eyes, cheating on Sophie with Zanna. We know that Zanna was pretty, I'm not going to say pushy, but she was very adamant about what she wanted, and she just took what she thought was hers. And we did get one mention of Sophie when Lucy was trying to shove it into Xana's face that Sophie had tried to contact them in either the last chapter or two right before. But we haven't seen Sophie proper in the books in quite a while. So it'd be interesting to see how that goes. But with that being said, let's get into chapter 17, An Old Friend. And we open up with Lucy writing into her journal. She's saying that it's not fair that he, and we didn't get a name for him, we didn't get a name of who he was, sorry guys, we didn't get a name of who she was talking about until the end of the entry. But she's talking about how she's green of eyed, but can change it to violet when she's angry or activating her powers, and that these guys don't really notice her. When she's just with green eyed, she's absolutely gorgeous, her words, and violet eyed, she's dangerous. At the end of this journal entry, though, we get that she's talking about Tam, and obviously she's just frustrated about him not acknowledging her when he was just there. She asks, would it have been so hard to say hello? How are you doing? Are you okay? It would have been just a simple separation of the lips. But instead, he just looked at her and walked out when he had just visited. The journal gets interrupted, though, when a phone call comes in. And at this moment, Lucy is completely alone in the house. David had taken off to go to Africa. Liz had gone to pick up Arthur. And Zanna and Alexa, obviously, were we're moving into Henry Bacon's house. Well, I guess moving into their house now, right next door. Knowing that nobody else is in the house, Lucy presses pause on her iPad and walks over to the room where the landline is still connected. And I thought this was funny because, I mean, obviously books are supposed to be timeless, but this pretty much dates it. And even the book mentions it, that Lucy wonders why they have a landline in this time of cell phones. But it's still pretty common. I mean, I guess I wouldn't say common, but I know quite a few people, maybe on the elder side, that still have landlines, and it's just easier, which I kind of agree with. Like, I don't want to get too much into it, but there's a few elder people in my life who have a smartphone and access to the internet, And unfortunately, that has been more detrimental than helpful. Obviously, you can still stay connected through Facebook and Instagram and FaceTime, which is great for talking with your grandchildren or your children, period. But that also opens you up to quite a lot. And there are people that are willing to take advantage of any and everyone. So I guess my message would be to be careful of who you're talking to, be aware, maybe check on the elders and what pages they're going on. Almost almost like a child, but it's harder to deal with because they're an adult. With that being said, Lucy answers the phone, and it's her old friend Melanie Cartwright. They're going back and forth at first, and Lucy doesn't quite remember her. Melanie is reminding her, like, we used to talk about dragons. We thought it would be so cool. It's been so long, and not a her. Which was interesting. I was wondering how much Lucy had talked to this little girl about the dragons, because obviously Lucy has been around Liz and these special dragons her whole life. And when you're a child, you're going to share things unintentionally, maybe even intentionally, wanting to have somebody be within your circle to understand what you're going through and to be in that camaraderie. So I was wondering during this quick moment, we get some answers later on in the chapter, but how much Melanie knew about the dragons. Melanie goes on and is asking Lucy if she's been seeing what's going on TV and that there's dragons showing up, the mist in the Arctic. She said that there's been no sight of a polar bear in 2 months, and that there's theories that the dragons that are being covered in the mist are using them as food. This kind of concerns Lucy, but she doesn't believe it because she knows the whole history of Thorin and Gwaine and knows about the connection between the two. She doesn't divulge that information to Melanie though, and decides that she just doesn't have that kind of time, or doesn't know if Melanie can quite handle the truth. There's also a quick mention of Harry Potter in here. Melanie's After Lucy is saying that she hasn't really been watching TV too much or even online. Melanie says, "Are you alive today? This is the biggest thing since Harry." And Lucy is asking, "Who? Harry who?" And Melanie says, "Harry Potter," which is interesting. This is now the second or third reference to Harry Potter within this whole series. Obviously, this series was written in the thick of the Harry Potter movies being written, because obviously the books themselves were written in, I want to say, the mid to late 90s, and then the movie started being made in the early 2000s. I know the movies hadn't, I know the books hadn't been completed yet by the time that the movies started as well. So there was a little bit of uh, cross between, the two being created. I just thought it was funny. Obviously, I've done a couple of crossover episodes. I'm gonna call them with Mike Schubert from over at TNO as well as Potterless, and we're both very adamant that J.K. Rowling is a terrible person. So these are huge pieces of media that a lot of people grew up with over the time. I understand if they have a dear place in your heart. The thing that I would say is just watch the movies if you need to. If you're going to buy a book, maybe source it from a different place and try not to uh, let J.K. Rowling profit more than she has to. And don't watch the new show. I think we're mostly in agreement that it's going to be pretty terrible. In my opinion, Harry Potter is one of the best book to movies adaptations. Obviously, no adaptation is going to be perfect. They missed out on a lot of characters, a couple events here and there. But overall, I think after Lord of the Rings, it's probably the best. So just watch the movies. Anyway, with that being said, Melanie lets Lucy know that a dragon had popped up on the news in Canada, which is, we know, pretty close to where Lucy, Liz, and Arthur had just been to go see Professor Steiner, who is trying to translate the pictures that he got from Henry Bacon that contained the dragon tongue. She said that there was a healing retreat that was going on, kind of meditation and prayer type of deal. And this dragon showed up. It didn't say which dragon. Obviously, we can infer about who right after the events that took place. But this dragon showed up, surprised everyone, and everyone could see it. That's the interesting thing. We know that with these dragons, unless you're given the ability by Liz or Guilana or even Gretel has the power to give you with the potions that she has, like she did with David, you're not supposed to be able to see these dragons. You might be able to see a flash, but they move at such a speed that your human eye cannot comprehend what's going on. And so the fact that these people were all able to means that the dragon that was there and interacting intended for them to see this. They do let him, Melanie lets Lucy know that the dragon picked up a light pen, which is used to write messages on like a smart board or something of that effect, and wrote on scribbles, which everybody was guessing had to be some form of written language, and they're not sure. They just know that it's absolutely ancient. So obviously, we know that this is more dragon tongue, and it makes me wonder if the Professor Steiner is going to be able to get a hold of this and exactly what the dragon wrote down. Forgive me, I am a physical note taker. I have a spiral notebook just right over here, so if you see me glancing, I'm just trying to grab a quick look. You might see me flip through. Again, I'm new to this video form, so if you guys, I was planning on editing out me flipping pages, but if you guys don't want that, just let me know. Be more than happy to keep it in just so it's a flow and a smooth video. But with that being said, uh, let me flip my page and see what's going on. While this conversation is going on between Melanie and Lucy, Lucy remembers that Liz used to give out special dragons on occasion during the markets that she was selling right before David. And the practice of giving out special dragons to live out in the world had stopped with David, which is interesting because, I mean, special circumstances is Sophie. Sophie came into the life of Liz through David, and Grace was already created, and I guess had the special ability. So Sophie was able to take her as a gift, but again, I think that Grace canonically would have been the last special dragon to be out in the world without permission. I guess it would be with permission, but without the expressed intention. You know what I'm saying? But Melanie is actually the holder of one of these special dragons as well. Liz had given her Glade, who is a special mood dragon, has the typical Pennykettle features. He's a clay green dragon with a special scarf that changes color based upon how the people in the room around him are feeling. Melanie is wanting to get a hold of Lucy because she says that when she was watching the news about obviously Gadzooks in the Canadian retreat, she showed Glade the reruns of it, and Glade's scarf just started going crazy. So this led Melanie to wondering if Glade was a special live dragon as well. And I mean, obviously, if you know that this dragon looks almost exactly like yours, and Melanie says that it looks very similar and like one of Liz's that she's so used to in her childhood, you would begin to wonder if your dragon was special as well. And I mean, I would want that. Obviously, we've talked about that, especially with Lucy and Darian who do Aragon and back again. I don't know what would be cooler to be able to ride a dragon or have one that helps you with your special abilities, period. This conversation has to be cut short. Lucy hears somebody calling for her. Liz just got home with Arthur. And so Lucy, before she's answering Melanie on if her dragon was special, which Lucy did know, she knew that Glade is a special dragon. She didn't confirm or deny. But Melanie did ask right before if she believes dragons are here and dragons are real. Obviously, not just the Pennykettle dragons, but dragons proper, capital D dragons. Lucy doesn't give much. All she says is yes, and then hangs up the phone instantly. But we also get then that that Lucy was gonna start heading down the stairs to go to her mom, who was calling for her. And right before she walks in, she can see between the gap of the kitchen doors that Arthur was sitting there holding Bonington there within range, but Liz, her mom, is right out of view, kind of over to the right is what I was picturing. And Liz is saying something that Lucy can't know yet. She needs more time to be able to tell her delicately, because Lucy's under the belief that Gawain has always been this gentle dragon who had good intentions. And she doesn't want to break that image for Lucy, knowing that Gawain is getting ready to destroy something. This makes Lucy a little hesitant, but she feels good that she's got the one up on her mom, essentially, since she didn't hear the full conversation. Lucy was pretty smart. She popped in her earbuds from her iPod, started playing music so that she could play dumb when she was walking down. And Liz is asking why Lucy was home alone. She couldn't find Zanna or Alexa, asks about David, and Lucy just kind of loses her temper a little bit. She throws a little bit of a temper tantrum and starts stomping her feet when she's talking, saying that she's not in charge of everyone and David left to go see Sophie. But that brings us to the end of that chapter. And, um, you know, if I had a best friend back in the day who was just super into the world of something specific. Obviously, with Lucy, we're talking about dragons, but anything of that range. And then, a couple years down the road, we get more actions of something being real. I think I would just assume. I wouldn't need any confirmation. I would just start talking to my dragon as if they were. I think everybody sometimes can look over at their pets if you have any and just that one time say, "Can you talk?" I won't tell anybody if you don't tell anybody, just between me and you. I know I've done that. We've got two dogs pretty recently. They're both rescues and they're both puppies, but we got them about 2 months apart. And when we had just the one, I would do that all the time as we were trying to get him to be comfortable in the house and be comfortable with us. Lay there on the floor with him and just stroke him and talk to him and say, I'm here, man. Talk to me." Never got anything, but one can hope. All right, with that, let's get into chapter 18, Africa. This one's a pretty short chapter, but it's also one of the most impactful. David shows up, and the village that Sophie was at is already in immense chaos. It's on fire. There's villagers running around trying to save all the animals that are in their habitat. There's a couple of guys. We only got a few names. Peter. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It is spelled Pieter. So Pieter. Who knows? Muto, and then we get Sophie a little bit later in the chapter. But again, there's a bunch of chaos going on. Fire on every hut around. Peter is going around trying to open up all of these mesh enclosures. And I don't know if this is wire mesh or the plastic mesh, because I would think if it's plastic, it would just be melted off right away. But if it's that metal stuff, these enclosures are going to be hot to the touch. There's a couple of references to that this guy, Peter, is grabbing cloth, wrapping it around his hand so that he can open up the gate. And a lot of gazelle. I think they said 3 gazelles run out, but there's a half blind zebra. Still, I don't know what you call a baby zebra. Obviously, like a baby horse is a colt, So I'll have to look that up and do some more research. But a baby zebra is in there half blind, scared because obviously there's a bunch of chaos and fire going. And so Peter goes in and wraps his arms around her neck to try to pull her out. She's absolutely stuck. And right above them, a huge piece of timber that's on fire starts falling. And the book wants to leave it on a bit of a cliffhanger. I'm sure if it was a movie or if it was a TV show, this is where it would fade to black and be either to be continued or a commercial break. But luckily, since it's a book, we get to just read right on and see what happens. But out of nowhere, there's a huge gust of wind, and the speed at which the log was falling comes abruptly a lot slower, and it still strikes the zebra, but with a force that doesn't hurt anyone. The fires were completely taken out, and Peter didn't know what was going on at all. The zebra finally, after being smacked in the butt by this big old log, runs out as well. And we get that there's a couple of other enclosures everybody is trying to get open with, like lion. There was some natural birds, some native birds in an enclosure as well. They're all freaking out as everything would be. Then we get that Peter looked over, and out of nowhere is a dragon. We don't get the dragon's name. I believe it's Grackle because it said that it's a golden bronze color almost. And if I remember right, the last time we had seen Grackle, he was that same color. I thought that he got there pretty fast. If David had called him, I don't think that Grackle has the ability to teleport unless he was called already or just had some kind of inkling that something was going on. I'm not sure if the Pennykettle clay dragons have connections with the proper dragons, so I'm not sure if Grace could have called Grockle, but Grockle is there helping put out all of the fires in this hut. When all the fires are put out, this old lion that had been saved there is looking at the dragon just entranced and said that he's following his head is following this dragon in slow motion. Slow motion is what it says. And then Grockle takes off as soon as everything is kind of tampered down and calmed. We get a little bit of a calm after that. There's still a bunch of villagers freaking out. And we get a body lying. David heads over that way after he sees a few villagers starting to gather. Peter is, I wouldn't say hysterical, but he's very upset after he sees who's laying on the ground, saying, "No, oh no, please no, this can't be happening." And when we get over to see who the body was, it happens to be Sophie. And this is sad. I was hoping to have a guest on the episode which Sophie passed. I do. This is one of the main events I remember from reading this book. Like I said, over 15 years ago. I've only read the series once, so I know the main plot lines here and there. And I knew that this happened. I just didn't remember where. So that's my fault for not having somebody. But I'm sure that me and Kaylee will cover this in depth when we go to do the book review. But with that being said, salute soldier. The fact that Sophie's first appearance in 3 books happens to be her death, and she didn't even get to say anything, which is disrespectful almost. Uh, yeah, we also get this interaction of everybody starting to freak out and they don't know what's going on because out of nowhere, a little small clay dragon zips up and presents herself onto Grace or onto Sophie's chest. We do know that this is Grace, and David says that this is what everything was started after. Nobody else can really see Grace moving, they just see her solid form. But since David has the ability, he sees that Grace is sitting there getting very sad. There's moisture starting to build on her scalene eye, which we kind of knew. Obviously, this was the Darkling's whole point of doing this was to kill the owner so that they can get a fire tier here and turn it into dark fire with the sadness. But that's the end of the chapter right there. We just get that her tear is starting to come. Man, death is never something that you want to have to deal with. I think this would have been a lot harder if Sophie had been in the books a little bit more. I think that would be my only critique. Even without her having any appearances, it's still hard. You know, this was David's first girlfriend. She had a pretty big part. Lucy absolutely loved her in the first book. So I think if I could have changed anything or given any critiques to Chris Lacey, I would say we should have had some scenes just sprinkled here and there. Some connections with Grace. You know, maybe Grace could have given us some updates on what's going on, or maybe Sophie could have had some kind of news article written about her, or just some form of involvement other than her just being in Africa and then dying. But with all that, I mean, what can you really do? That brings us to the end of that chapter, and now we will get into chapter 19, David's warning. The villagers are all worried watching this. We're still in the Africa village. They look up on top of one of the buildings and see this nasty, dark creature. Then one of the only other villagers that was named, called Muto, Mutu, comes in with a gun. He's holding it about hip height, and he's getting ready to look up. And David gives him a warning. He says, "Don't shoot. That grace is what they're here for, and there doesn't need to be any more harm done or any more chaos." But Muto doesn't really listen. Obviously, when something's destroyed everything that you've worked for and killed one of your closest compadres, comrades, friends, coworkers, whatever you want to call them, you're going to hold a little grief and want for revenge in that. It's just completely understandable. But he doesn't listen and he takes a shot. The bullet goes true and hits its target, but the Darkling doesn't really react. It does fling back just by the pure force of the bullet. There's a small hole created by the bullet that is trickling out some gross ooze, is how it describes it, just darkling blood. Um, but since these things aren't technically like alive, I don't know if we can call it blood. With that being said, though, the bird is just sitting there and watching everything. David is giving everybody warnings, but Peter is just absolutely destroyed and saying that this thing took his fiance and it can have him too if it likes, but not without a fight. And he pulls out a knife ready to try to slay this thing. I thought the fact that we got a mention of Peter being Sophie's fiance was out of the blue too. Like obviously Sophie's going to move, everybody's going to move on in 5 years. But the fact that we don't see Sophie at all, period, and then just to find out that she had this whole other life without seeing her kind of sucks. You know, like I'm happy for her. I'm glad she moved on and was getting what seemed to be a bright future. It just would have been nice to be able to see it. After that happened, though, the Darkling takes the knife as a threat and it flies down trying to swoop over at Grace because David is sitting there as well, seeing what's going on, but he takes out the piece of obsidian with dark fire already in it. And the Darkling has to choose between an unbridled fire tier or dark fire already created. And so he flies at David, and it said the speed at which David reacted and grabbed the bird by its throat was almost incomprehensible to the villagers. They're all standing around watching this, and he is talking to the bird and threatening it. but saying that he doesn't want to be the cause of more chaos for the Ix. And so he tells the Raven to go back to their leader and to leave everybody alone. He won't get anything from the Pennykettles or any of the dragons, period. And if he does, he'll kill them all. At this moment, though, as David has the bird in his clutches, Peter jumps up and tries to stab it with a knife. When that happens, it is almost too fast. It's even too fast for David, and it's still in David's hands. But this Darkling slash Raven went through and used its claws and just slashed up Peter's chest, and it kills him. He falls to the ground, and he had just enough fight in him to lift up his arm and put it over Sophie, but he didn't even get the opportunity to say goodbye. After this, the cops start showing up to Africa, and the cops start showing up to the village in Africa. Sorry, got semi-emotional. um, but Muto comes up to David and asks him what they should tell the cops. David says to just tell them what they'll believe, because they won't be able to comprehend anything at this time, and they'll believe what they want to. I didn't really get what he meant from that, but whatever. Muto does say that nobody in the village really wants to speak on the events that happened, and they're all pretty freaked out. He does ask David what he intends to do with the dragon, and he calls him by name, says David Rain. David takes a second and asks him, "How did you know my name?" But Muto just says that he's been working with Sophie this whole time for the past 5 years. She was a great girl. She always spoke very fondly of this dragon, and the dragon reminded her of a perfect, cute family, a garden, and her first boyfriend. And so he obviously knew that this man was David. Apologize, I need to flip my notes. After Muto walks away, David says in an ancient language, I wasn't sure which one, to show. And we get that Groin showed up. He was in his invisible form, but he's holding something shiny. And he had caught Grace's fire tear. David is looking at the obsidian knife, and he's telling the dragon that it's time to go home and see what they can do about it. He also gets Muto's attention and says, "I never told you what I was going to do. I'm going to bring him." And that's the end of this section. I think if we can save Grace somehow, that would be a nice tribute to Sophie, almost, is what I would say. Maybe not tribute, but a nice little remembrance, just a way to keep her alive in the story, is to have her dragon. But tough section to go through. The only ones alive from book one are the humans, and no longer Sophie. We had the death of not Snigger, but Conker. Conker was the one-eyed squirrel that had an infection and everything. And Sophie was a big part of saving him at the wildlife sanctuary in Scruffenberry. Actually, Scruffenberry is not there. That's the hill that the dragon is resting in, but in Wayward Crescent. So I don't really have too much to say after that. I just want to take a second and thank you guys for being here. Again, this is my first this is my first video podcast, and there will be a lot of steps going forward. So if you guys have any questions, comments, suggestions, I know I said at the beginning of the episode, but you can always hit me up at gadzookstheLastDM@gmail.com. One thing I'm going to ask for is please go to anywhere that you can rate your podcast, whether that's Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Music, and give me a fair rating. Give me the rating that you think I deserve. I believe that if you listen from episode 1 to now, there's been some exponential progress, but we can always improve. I will be starting a couple of new podcasts as well. Me and my first guest ever, Kaylee, who comes back for book reviews, are going to be starting a couple different ones. Look forward to that. there's going to be one called If You Need Me, where it's just going to be me and her kind of talking. We've known each other for well over a decade, whether it's been school, working together back in the day, and now just being friends and hanging out. And then we're going to go over her favorite book series as well. We're going to be starting a new one called A Volunteer's Tribute, where we go over the Hunger Games. So look out for those. Those will probably be started within the month. But again, I appreciate it. Thanks for joining me. I hope you have a safe flight out and hit no turbulence.